VBZ vas poziva na 17. riječki sajam knjiga i festival autora Vrisak.
Otkrijte najbolje od književnosti i kulture u Art kvartu Benčić. Od 14. do 21. rujna Rijeka postaje centar kulturne scene.
Vrisak donosi više od 50 događanja, 80 domaćih i međunarodnih autora, te bogat program od promocija knjiga i razgovora do filmova, koncerata i izložbi.
Sve knjige snižene su od 20 do 80%. Više informacija na vrisak.vbz.hr.
Vidimo se na Vrisku u Art kvartu Benčić.
Dobar večer svima. Večer, lijep pozdrav, veselje i čast mi je pozdraviti nakon moje riječke publike pred kojom zapravo kao Riječanka nastupam prvi put u ulozi moderatorice na mjestu Hane Samaržije koja je bila spriječena večeras doći zbog visoke temperature. Dakle, još jednom, čast mi je i veselje pozdraviti Eliza Clark, britansku autoricu iz Newcastlea koja danas živi u Londonu. Molim vas jedan veliki pljesak za Elizu. Povod Elizinog gostovanja na ovogodišnjem 17. Vrisku je njezin roman Prvijenac, Komad malog, koji je 2023. godine objavljen u nakladi Oceanmore, u prijevodu Mirte Jurilj. A ja sam Nataša Medved i urednica romana i dakle vodit ću vas večeras kroz sve priče moguće o samom ovom romanu koji je vrlo zanimljiv, a onda ćemo se dotaknuti i njezinog najnovijeg romana Penance ili Pokora, a govorit ćemo malo i o zbirci kratkih priča koja je sad friško objavljena. Dakle, Eliza, dobrodošla u Rijeku. Jesi li se uspjela malo odmoriti od puta i jesi li uspjela osjetiti malo riječke bure?
Yeah, it's really windy here, isn't it? Yeah, no, I've had a nice day. I've never been to Croatia before, and it's really nice here.
Nadamo se da ti nije i zadnji put. Dakle, roman Komad malog je zapravo svojevrsni književni fenomen. Objavljen je 2020. godine pod naslovom Boy Parts u maloj izdavačkoj kući iz Londona, ali je vrlo brzo osvojio srca čitatelja, posebno mlađe publike, jer se vijest o tom, kako su govorili, ubojitom generacijskom romanu vrlo brzo proširila internetom. A roman se našao i na Blackwellovoj listi beletrističkih knjiga godine i bio je finalist nagrade Women's Prize for Fiction Futures za spisateljice mlađe od 35 godina. Pa evo, moje prvo pitanje za Elizu je bilo koliko ju je uspjeh njezinog prvijenca Komad malog iznenadio, što ti je značio i kako je to utjecalo na tvoj daljnji profesionalni rad?
I mean, it kind of changed everything for me. When it was first published, it was, as you'd said, it was published with a small independent press in London. And when it was first published, it did well for what it was, and I think it was their best-selling title for. I think it might still be their best-selling title, and it was it did well for what it was, and then it seemed like, kind of 2020 sort of ticked along after it came out. Obviously, there was the pandemic, so I didn't do anything like this in 2020, and I didn't do anything like this again really in 2021 because of the kind of continuing restrictions. But the book didn't really kind of hit. It's sort of, I don't know, I guess the viral heights that it ended up hitting until mid to late 2021 when it sort of went viral on TikTok, and that was when it kind of became kind of a life-changing book for me. I mean, my second novel had already sold to a bigger publishing house along with my short story collection, and I'd started doing a bit of work in film and television, but it was after that sort of TikTok bounce in 2021. I was able to quit my day job. I was able to buy a flat. not outright. I was able to get a mortgage, which is huge, and it's also quite hot here under the lights, so I'm gonna. It's just, and it kind of it means everything to me. I mean, since I was a little kid, I've wanted to be an author. Like when you used to ask me what I wanted to do when I was like 5 or 6, I used to say I want to be a writer without any like knowledge of what that would actually entail. And my parents would always say that you can't just be a writer, you have to do something else. And I did do something else for a while, but now I am pretty much just a writer, which is really, really cool. Yeah, it's been huge. I kind of owe like everything to this book, and it's been a really, really exciting few years. Not just because of the sort of sales, but also because I get to do stuff like this. It's such a privilege to be able to come to Croatia, which was the first translation of anything I got was the Croatian edition of Boy Parts, and that's really exciting.
Evo, drago mi je da je Oceanmore bio prvi koji je prepoznao potencijal ove knjige i na stranom tržištu i da su zapravo i hrvatski čitatelji vrlo brzo nakon originala imali priliku ga je pročitati. Za one koji još nisu pročitali, ja ću samo ukratko skicirati neki sadržaj romana, čisto da vam budu malo bliski likovi i situacije. Dakle, pratimo Irinu, glavnu junakinju i naratoricu. Ona je umjetnica, fotografkinja koja je već kao studentica svojim provokativnim radovima postigla zapažen uspjeh. Na početku romana ona radi kao konobarica u lokalnom baru i dalje se bavi naravno fotografijom i to snimanjem eksplicitnih zapravo fotografija ne pretjerano zgodnih muškaraca mlađe dobi s ulica Newcastle koje je nagovorila da joj poziraju. Irina zapravo negdje onako životari i čeka neku bolju priliku. Ona naravno i prodaje svoje printove i fotografije, ali kada dobiva ponudu za izlaganjem na skupnoj izložbi u Londonu, Irina to shvati vrlo ozbiljno i počne se pripremati za izložbu u sklopu koje će biti objavljena fotomonografija. Ona se vraća opet u svoje studentske dane, prekapajući po svojoj arhivi, ali to sve skupa zapravo nju vraća u neke dane, vraćaju se nekakve drugačije slike i ona pada sve više u neki, ne znam kako bih to nazvala, autodestruktivni zapravo nekakav sunovrat, gdje se onda granica između stvarnosti i zbilje lagano počinje zamagljivati. Uz to spirala nasilja se pokreće i postaje sve destruktivnija. Evo, to su stvarno ukratko crtice. Ja bih te odmah sad pitala da nam ti sama približiš glavni lik, Irinu, koja je hiperinteligentna, beskompromisna, ja bih rekla i hiperosjetljiva, ali zapravo je i narcisoidna, manipulativna umjetnica, možda nešto što bismo u povijesti književnosti nazvali antijunakinjom, osoba koja je negdje na granici divljenja i iritacije koju stvara i kod čitatelja. Možeš li nam zapravo reći tko je Irina i koja je zapravo tvoja motivacija i što je bio pokretač za pisanje upravo ovakvog romana koji, čućemo kasnije, koji se dotiče brojnih suvremenih tema?
Yeah, I was very angry when I wrote Boy Parts, which I think is probably something that comes across in the novel. I wrote it in like I wrote it in 2018 and sort of did the second draft of it through 2019. It was picked up in mid-2019 and then published in summer of 2020. So it was kind of like a sort of 2-3 year turnaround for it. And I'd come back from university. I also went to art school, like the protagonist in the novel. And I came back to Newcastle And I just kind of didn't really know what I was going to do, and I felt really frustrated that I couldn't find a job that I was like interested in, and I couldn't. And I found that because I was working in a bar, and then I started working at an Apple store for a couple of years, and that I was always kind of tired after work, and I felt very creatively frustrated. And I think part of when I started writing this, it was just because I was so like angry about like, I guess just a bunch of stuff. There was obviously like career stuff, but I think I was angry about men. And I was angry about being sort of mistreated in my day job, and I was just really angry. I mean, I was like 23, 24, so you're just pissed off until you get to about 28, and then I feel like you start to kind of chill out a little bit. But yeah, and then I think Irina kind of came out of that just sort of like, I don't know, she's almost just that nasty voice that is like everything that you think about saying to every stupid customer you have to deal with, or every rude man you have to deal with, or everyone who kind of talks to you like you're an idiot who you have to deal with in your day-to-day life. And I was working with, I'd gotten really, really lucky and had managed to get a place on a new writers sort of development scheme. And I had a mentor who I was sort of showing him my writing to feed back on. And I wrote Boy Parts as kind of like a short story first. And I really enjoyed kind of writing in her voice. I found it really fun and really funny and quite cathartic in a lot of ways. So I carried it through into being a full novel, and it was just really interesting to kind of create this character that was initially like, I guess it was like a short horror story that it started out as, and it was really, I don't know, it was just fun to kind of pick apart a character and decide like why she's like that and why she is the way she is, and think about her pathology and her backstory and the kind of way that a person turns out like this. And then on the sort of side of her art, I was thinking a lot about like, I hit a bit of a wall halfway through writing it, and sort of got writer's block and stopped. And then I went on like a holiday with friends to Berlin, and we saw this huge retrospective of Helmut Newton's photographs. He's like a sort of fashion art photographer. And it was, all of the photos were just of like thin, beautiful women in compromising positions. But all of the curation, like the captions on the photographs was like, honestly, you would think it was the fucking Mona Lisa over and over and over again, with how like effusive and just kind of ridiculously over the top these photographs were, when it was just kind of like, I don't know, to me the beautiful woman had put far more work into making that photograph look good. All he did was kind of point the camera, and that woman had to be on a diet for ages. That woman had to spend 5 hours in hair and makeup. Like, why is he getting all the credit? And I just sort of had this thought of like, God, imagine if a woman tried to behave like that, if a woman kind of framed her own art like that, I just feel like she would get kind of eaten alive, or things just wouldn't work the way that it does for men who make art like that. And that was when I had this kind of real revelation about what to do with her art and what to do with her as a character. And yeah, sorry, I rambled on for ages there.
Da, rekla sam na početku da je Irina zapravo jako osviještena i po pitanju i rodnih uloga, i po pitanju reprezentacije žena, i u umjetnosti, i u književnosti. Ona sve to na vrlo izravan način tematizira, izgovara. Jezik u ovom romanu je jako važan i mislim da su se zbog toga mnogi mlađi čitatelji i onda, a i danas zalijepili za roman i pronašli se i na mnoge načine su se mogli identificirati. Dakle, jezik je zapravo urban, puno žargona, slenga, koristi se čak i jezik onako suvremene danas, preuzet je čak i grafički u romanu jezik SMS-ova poruka gdje ima jako puno pogrešaka, znači to nisu tipfeleri koje smo mi u uredništvu napravili, to je tako u romanu. Mislim da je Mirta Jurilj koja je prevela roman napravila izvrstan posao, da je zaista uspjela prenijeti taj bijes koji je prisutan i u engleskom jeziku, kao što si rekla, mislim taj anger i bijes se osjeti u svakom detalju, od samih tema do načina kako izražavaš, pa i do odnosa koje uspostavljaš ovdje. Pa bih te tako pitala, vrlo odmah i na početku se Irina nalazi u baru, zapravo na ručku sa svojom majkom. Jedna od tema ovoga romana je i generacijski jaz, koji se očituje zapravo na puno nivoa. Već si na samom početku spomenula kako su tvoji roditelji rekli, ba daj neki posao si nađi pravi, pa nećeš biti umjetnica, to kao nije neko zanimanje, to je nešto usput. Mislim da danas vlada još takav jedan stav prema tim zanimanjima, prema umjetničkim zanimanjima. Pa evo, možeš nam malo reći sad o tom generacijskom jazu. Što se tu događa između Irine i njezine majke?
Yeah, I mean, I was, because there's so much about Irina's relationship with men in the novel, it did make me think that I had to think a lot about her parents, and I immediately thought that I didn't want her to have daddy issues, that would feel quite easy and quite reductive, and I wanted to. Her relationship with her father is probably like the least complicated relationship she has in the novel. It's like she has quite a straightforward and quite pleasant relationship with her dad, but this very sort of turbulent relationship with her mother, where I was thinking a lot about women my age, I feel, having the experiences of their mothers kind of monitoring their bodies quite a lot and monitoring their weight and growing up in this kind of like diet culture. And that was sort of what I was thinking about at first. And then I kind of bounced off of that, of thinking of kind of, if her mother is very concerned with her body, I guess what else is she concerned about? What else does she want to kind of control in her life? And I just thought it would be, I don't know, I guess more interesting for her foundational kind of, I guess the first relationships we really have usually are with our mothers. And I wanted to make sure that this sort of first primary relationship, this kind of like first baseline that she should have, that should be kind of firm and steady, was actually quite like turbulent and quite difficult to pin down. And I think there is kind of I would say there's like a pretty sort of consistent satirical element to Boy Parts. There was a really interesting article that a writer called Hugh Lemmy wrote in a left-wing magazine we have in the UK called The Tribune, which was analysing Boy Parts as like a satire of Britain in the post-Tony Blair era. Tony Blair being the Labour Party sort of centre-left prime minister we had through the 1990s, who kind of saw Britain through a big era of social mobility, and, you know, a lot of people whose parents had come from quite, I guess kind of like my parents, a lot of people whose parents had come from very working class backgrounds kind of suddenly had money and suddenly had like decent jobs and houses that they'd bought. And then obviously you kind of get to the sort of economic crash that happened in the mid-2000s that a lot of millennials, I think, the world over, but there was something, I guess, in Britain, because we'd had so much hope and so much uptick of economic prospects for people of all sorts of different backgrounds. I think the phrase that they used to trot out was equality of opportunity. We were supposed to have equality of opportunity. And then there was this big economic crash. We had a conservative government come in who ended up being very damaging to our economy, and things like the fees for university tripled, and that made a huge sort of difference to the outcome of career and of life of people my age and older, I guess. I think I'm sort of right at the sort of youngest end of the millennial generation, and I was part of the first cohort to experience the tripled university fees. So I think it was interesting watching I guess I wanted to kind of think about one of the big gaps we have in the UK is like obviously a huge wealth gap between generations, and that like a lot of people my age were still kind of living at home quite late, and that there was this kind of sense of like, why don't you all just stop complaining? Why can't you all just get better jobs? And why can't you all just earn more money? And why can't you all just buy houses and kind of shut up? And this expectation that things should, I don't know, almost like we should all just put our fingers in our ears and pretend it's still the 1990s and that things are just going to get better when they kind of not necessarily are. So I guess I wanted to reflect that generational tension. Sorry for talking for ages about the recent economic political history of Britain, but I was thinking about that when I wrote her relationship with her mother.
Ne, to je silno zanimljiva tema. U romanu je to, evo, kao što sam rekla, prikazano također vrlo ozbiljno. Naravno, znamo šta je satira i humor, da je to samo način, jedan od načina prikazivanja te surove stvarnosti. Moje jedno od pitanja je upravo bilo pitanje prekarnog rada, općenito prekarnog načina života, posebno i mlađe generacije, a onda i pitanje umjetničkog rada i djelovanja danas, pa možemo možda nešto reći o tome. Sama si rekla da ima dosta Irine u tebi, barem ovi neki biografski dijelovi. Studirala si umjetnost, radila si gomilu poslova i evo, prvi roman ti je zapravo ti je otvorio tu mogućnost, ali mnogima se to ne događa. Mnogi su i dalje ostali iza barova, mnogi umjetnici, veliki pisci. Misliš li da je potrebna neka vrsta sreće, da se treba naći u pravo vrijeme na pravom mjestu, baš kao što Irina to misli, da će se samo ako bude na pravom mjestu u pravo vrijeme, ako bude imala dovoljno dobru haljinu, dobro nalakirane nokte, da će joj se mnoga vrata otvoriti. Dakle, ona je vrlo svjesna svih mogućih zapravo normi koje grade danas život i koje ona mora negdje prihvatiti, i ona to čini na zanimljiv način, ali da li je to dobro za nju? Da li je to dobro za njeno mentalno zdravlje, recimo? I to je jedna od važnih tema ovoga romana.
Yeah, I mean, I think about luck all the time in terms of my own career. I think for boy parts to be in the position it is, I've kind of had a series of really lucky breaks, in that I was very lucky that I got onto the mentoring scheme. I was lucky that I kind of got onto this particular indie press's list when I did. I was lucky that Faber and Faber bought the book, which is a much bigger publishing house. I was lucky that it went viral on TikTok. It's just kind of this series of kind of almost like ridiculously lucky things that have happened to me. And I feel like there's something, I don't know, I always just think, I wish that it didn't have to be that way. And I wish that more, like you said, I wish more great writers and artists could get out of bars without there being this sort of luck element having to come into play always. On mental health, yeah, I suppose it was something that I was thinking about quite a lot with the book. I mean, I'm sort of often asked to diagnose Irina and to kind of tell people what exactly is wrong with her, and I guess I wanted to track how how like disappointments and this very sort of day-to-day nature of sexual violence that Irina both experiences and perpetrates, how this is just almost something that's become so normal for her, and how these things have just kind of slowly eroded away at her, I don't want to say her sanity, but I guess almost like her sense of boundaries and what's normal and what's good and what's appropriate, and to think about, I guess, the sort of massive amounts of psychic damage that just kind of existing in 21st century Britain day to day can do to a person, particularly women, particularly when you're kind of surrounded by men who are kind of potentially dangerous, and you never kind of know. I don't know. Sorry. Yeah, I was thinking a lot about that. And I've never really sort of, I don't know if I've ever kind of given her like a definitive diagnosis. I suppose if I was going to, I would say I feel like she's like a fragile narcissist.
Da li ti je bilo teško pisati lik Irine, koja je na rubu, evo, iritantne osobe u romanu, u svojim odnosima s najboljom prijateljicom Flo i sa mladim dečkom koga ona zapravo tretira na vrlo specifičan način. To je mladi prodavač iz lokalnog dućana koji se zaljubljuje u nju, ali ona te njegove osjećaje uzvraća na vrlo specifičan način, pa me zanima zapravo da kroz možda taj odnos nam malo približiš samo pitanje ljubavi, odanosti i na kraju možda prijateljstva, jer mi se čini da je u ovom romanu ipak prijateljstvo nešto što je možda važnije i od nekih seksualnih odnosa, a o seksualnosti ćemo malo kasnije.
Yeah, I think the character of Flo, of her friend, came after I mentioned that I wrote it as a short story first, and the short story was structurally not entirely dissimilar to the novel, in that it sort of starts with her working in the bar and getting invited to do this exhibition. The middle chunk of it was her relationship with Eddie, the boy from the shop, and then the end of it was her in London with none of her kind of backstory stuff. Her parents weren't in it, and probably the thing that tends to surprise people the most is that Flo wasn't in that at all when she feels so kind of important to the novel. And it was, I guess, trying to kind of like balance Irina being horrible with like who would realistically spend time with this person. And then I kind of had to, I don't know, I think the sort of three principal characters and boy parts I always say are sort of almost like representations of like the three of the like worst parts of my personality. And with Flo, I was thinking about how like, particularly when I was a teenager, I used to like, if I could like make friends with someone who was like super hostile and like really awful to the people around them, but they were nice to me, it used to make me feel very special. And I thought like that's the kind of person that would hang around with Irina, is like somebody who is desperate to please the people around them, and kind of like the worse the person is, the more they want to please them and the more they want to be liked by them and to be around them. And I think that it's almost that compulsion and flow that is what keeps her in Irina's life, and what ends up with her being this quite important figure. And it's kind of implied that Flo's made like repeated attempts to sort of divorce herself from this relationship, that she's always ended up kind of like crawling back and self-destructing to an extent to get back to Irina, to kind of get back into her gravitational pull. And I think I was thinking a lot about like, I guess like toxic friendships I'd had in my like late teens and early 20s, I'd already kind of implied that I was like a massive people pleaser in that capacity. It's something that I ended up coming back to more in my second novel, I guess, these toxic dynamics between early friendships that women often have and girls. And I hope that answers the question.
Da, jedan dio pitanja, a možemo se vratiti na dečka koji zapravo služi Irini kao prvi model. Dakle, prisjetimo se da Irina traži na ulicama mlade muškarce od kojih traži pismenu privolu, da ih fotografira i da oni postanu zapravo dio njenog umjetničkog rada. Pa tako evo i na samom početku imamo scenu kada majka jednog od dječaka, kako bih rekla, nisu više ni dječaci, malo su i možda i stariji, ali ne znamo tu granicu, znači sve se to nekako pomaknulo. Majka koja je pronašla te fotografije i zapravo je banula Irini u bar i zapravo je napala agresivno i tu počinje već Irinin otpor prema tome poslu. Znači u baru je naravno napadaju pijani muškarci koji zahtijevaju svakakve vrste ponašanja od nje. To su već stvarno stereotipi, ali evo na samom početku u nekoliko urnebesnih scena Elizi je uspjelo da dočara uopće cijelo to okružje. Pa evo, cijela ova moja velika digresija je zapravo bila da se vratimo na njen odnos prema tom mladiću iz Teska.
Yeah, that first scene in the novel was it sounds sort of reductive to say that was the first thing that I wrote, because it's the opening bit of the novel, but novels often aren't written chronologically, and the first scene is often the thing that changes the most and gets rewritten and replaced and moved around the most. But that was genuinely has always been the opening. And I got the idea for it because I'd mentioned that I was working at an Apple store at the time, and the shop that I worked at had this big glass front, and it was inside of a shopping mall. So you could see people walking past all the time. And there was one day, it was a new phone had come out, and we ran out of stock of the phone that this lady wanted who came in. And she asked me to check the stock, and I said, I know that we don't have any stock, sorry. And then she was really insistent that I go and check the stock, and I just kept saying I know we don't have it because we've run out of it for hours, and it's definitely not there. And she left the shop, and then I watched her turn around and come back in, and she just screamed in my face. She got really, really up in my face and I don't know what was going on with her, but she was really angry that I wouldn't check the stock for her. And I was thinking about that for ages, just the idea of kind of being stood there and being able to watch somebody kind of march in, and there's nothing you can do about it because you're at work, you're kind of stuck there. So I had the idea for this scene. This scene kind of came almost separate to the novel. I wanted to do something with this idea of you're kind of stuck and somebody might be about to physically attack you and there's nothing you can do about it. And then at the same time, I kind of had the idea to sort of write a horror story about a female photographer that kills men, which is reductively what the short story was about. And it was sort of bringing those two scenes together, and I thought, who would come in to scream at Irina while she was at work? And I thought, I guess either a model, but I thought if it was a model itself, it would be a little bit too straightforward and a bit too obvious, and also maybe a little bit too physically threatening. If a man came in to scream at her, I felt like that was something that everyone around her would take quite seriously, whereas if it's a woman that comes in, it immediately kind of makes the power dynamic a lot more even. And then there's sort of, I guess it's something that's easier for people to dismiss, is that kind of, I guess, a woman being physically attacked by another woman. And then to bring in the element of it being the woman's son, it being a young man, I wanted to I guess, immediately put the audience in an uncomfortable position where they're sympathizing a lot with her. Because I think a lot of people can relate to being shouted at work and having that experience of like, I don't know if this customer is going to hurt me or not. But then, so you feel very sympathetic toward her, but then also having the other element of, she's clearly done something really weird and she's clearly a really sort of strange person that you shouldn't trust. And I guess I wanted to open it with almost like a warning to the audience that this is where you are going to be with her constantly as somebody who you're going to sympathize with, but also be judging and being very sort of frustrated with and concerned about and like judgmental of her actions. I hope that made sense.
Da, zamalo želimo uskočiti u roman i pomoći Irini i povući je na drugu stranu. Ona sama neprestano ulazi u potpuno sulude situacije. Tu su veliku ulogu odigrali i alkohol i droge i pred kraj romana, kao što sam rekla, to se sve ubrzava i ne zna se više šta je tu stvarnost, šta se dogodilo i tu je briljantno zapravo Eliza uspjela dočarati taj prelazak u neku potpunu drugu stvarnost koja zapravo ne mora znači da je samo potaknuta nekim opijatima, nego mi se čini da u današnjem svijetu smo svi na tako nekim rubovima, pogotovo ako se sjetimo, ako vidimo koji utjecaj imaju i internet i društvene mreže, što si sve tematizirala još i detaljnije u svom sljedećem romanu Penance. Na hrvatskom je to Pokora. I trenutačno Mirta Jurilj prevodi taj roman na hrvatski. U Oceanmoru će biti objavljen sljedeće godine i Mirta poručuje da doslovno uživa u romanu jer je jednostavno briljantan i samom temom i jezikom, a opet i onime što zapravo Elizu Clark čini velikom spisateljicom, velikom umjetnicom riječi, način na koji ona uspijeva uspostaviti odnose, znači njen stil i sama konstrukcija romana. U Pokori je zapravo riječ o romanu, ali evo, morat ćemo se strpiti do sljedeće godine. Prije nego što se vratimo opet na Penance, jer htjela bih da nam samo malo o tome kažeš, željela bi da progovorimo zapravo o nečemu zbog čega je meni osobno, kad sam čitala kritike ovog romana, što mi je bilo zanimljivo i što je nas u Oceanmoru privuklo da ovaj roman objavimo. Znači, nešto što je odmah bilo vidljivo da je to potpuno drugačije napisano, da je tu mladi glas, da je jezik potpuno lud, ali i nešto što je u Irini, koja svojim eksplicitnim snimanjem muških zapravo tijela, što ona radi, ovo što je radio Newton sa mladim djevojkama, Irina ovdje radi s mladim dečkima i na taj način ona zapravo dekonstruira taj notorni muški pogled na ženu. I zašto tu je Eliza uspjela isto jednim karikiranjem zapravo i pretjerivanjem ukazati na to koje su rodne uloge i u reprezentaciji žena i umjetnosti i kako to zapravo prolazi i na nekom tržištu i u nekom javnom mnijenju. Zašto su te slike šokantne, a ove druge nisu, odnosno ove druge ženske nisu? Zašto je Irina uvijek na rubu skandala ili joj se tako percipira? Da progovorimo malo o tim rodnim stereotipovima i o tome kako se Irina ili kako se mlade žene danas bore protiv toga. Mislim da je to jedna vrlo važna i velika tema ovog romana.
Yeah, I guess I'd mentioned before that something I was thinking about a lot with this novel is basically what if a woman tries to behave the way that a man behaves, and how that kind of doesn't exactly work for her. But I was also sort of conscious of this being, I guess, like a kind of having like a cheap or an easy view of gender and gender stereotypes and gender dynamics. I didn't want this to be a black and white, men bad, women good, women never do anything wrong, men are always doing things wrong. I kind of wanted to think more in a more complicated way about gender, because I find that, like, I think particularly literature that is sometimes touted as feminist, and this is more in a kind of commercial and pop literature sphere, I find, but even sometimes often with literary fiction as well, that its analysis of gender can become very simplistic and can just become very sort of men bad. And I wanted to think a bit more deeply about it, and I think it was really important to have, I think in some ways it was important to not have too clear of a sense of what her photographs are actually like and what exactly they do and don't show. So the audience could almost insert their most, I guess, lurid version of whatever they think she's doing in there. And I always think it's interesting to hear from men who've read the novel and liked it, because they sort of speak about the experience of, like, not being used to the idea that women are looking at them. And I think women are so kind of conditioned to think constantly about how men are looking at them. I think it's like a Margaret Atwood quote that, like, every woman is there's a man inside her looking at her, and that it's this sort of the idea that you're constantly thinking about, how you look, how people are looking at you. And I think it was really interesting to hear from men that this sort of made them feel like that in some way. I guess that they had the experience of feeling like a woman in some ways, and that some men actually kind of actually enjoyed that it made them feel quite sexy in a way that they're not sort of used to feeling, which I thought was really interesting. And also what a funny sort of thing to take away from this novel in particular. But yeah, I found that really interesting, and I'm sort of glad, because I don't know, there's a lot in this novel about the act of looking and being looked at, and how awkwardly those sit together. Is, Irina, the protagonist, kind of being an encapsulation of that tension in some way, and that she's somebody who's looked at constantly and seems to make a lot of effort to make sure that she's looked at. But also she's the person behind the camera, and she kind of places herself as the person that is doing the looking rather than being looked at. There's a very sort of brief section where she talks about sitting for a photographer, that she has a romantic relationship sort of 2/3 of the way in, and her feeling sort of not very comfortable with this, which I think is, I don't know, I think of that as quite a humanizing moment for her, I suppose, as somebody who you've seen kind of only wanting to draw attention to themselves throughout the novel prior to that. And I think it was also very important to have the character of Eddie, who works at the shop, who becomes her sort of muse in there, who is very earnest and very genuine, and seems like somebody who's been continually mistreated by lots of different people through his life. And I guess sort of serves as a kind of, I don't know, I guess one of the sort of clearly, like, not necessarily morally good, but at least somebody who's not actively bad, like a lot of the people in the novel are. Yeah.
Eliza je zapravo, rekla bih, majstorica u oslikavanju tih suptilnih psiholoških nijansi, kao što je i sama rekla, ne želi da njeni likovi budu ili crno-bijeli ili dobri ili samo loši, a to se pogotovo vidi poslije i u romanu Penance, Pokora. Možeš li nam malo reći zašto si imala potrebu napisati roman koji zapravo donosi kritiku, ja bih rekla, fetišizacije zločina i nasilja kroz žanr true crime-a i pitanje etičnosti samog tog žanra? Znamo da u Hrvatskoj imamo vrlo uspješan true crime podcast. Možeš nam nešto reći o tom fenomenu, o svijetu zapravo i današnjih otuđenih tinejdžera, o čemu progovaraš kroz taj roman, o psihologiji zajednice, opet male zajednice, ko što čega se dotičeš i u romanu Komad malog?
Yeah, I mean, I used to listen to a lot of true crime podcasts and watch a lot of true crime documentaries without really kind of thinking too much about them. I would actually say that Boy Parts was quite influenced by the amount of true crime I was consuming because Irina has such an extreme personality, and I'm interested in people with extreme personalities and kind of very odd and unique psychology. And I think if you're interested in that sort of thing, true crime is a natural place to go because it's where you can hear about so many people who are kind of at the extreme outer edges of human behavior. And I was really interested in that. And I didn't really kind of think too much about the ethical implications of it until I really started to write Penance, my second novel, which I started writing Penance in late 2019, so I hadn't really been done with Boy Parts for all that long. And I knew I had to write something different from Boy Parts because I had seen the way that readers and the media discussed my female contemporaries and how there was a sort of a narrative that, this writer can only do one thing, this writer she's just going to write the same book over and over again. And I thought, I really can't, that can't be me. I really don't want people to think that I'm just going to write the same book over and over again. So I knew I had to do something very different. I knew it had to be a topic that was sort of big enough to hold my interest as well. So I thought I just went straight to true crime because it was what I was most clearly interested in. And then I thought Penance is written as if it were a non-fiction book. It has a fictional narrator and so I could do something structurally very different and structurally more ambitious than Boy Parts. Boy Parts is a very, very simple book in a lot of ways, and Penance is far more complicated structurally. And yeah, I think people talk about how different the two books are, but they feel they feel like they flow quite naturally to me, particularly when I'm kind of thinking about bouncing off from listening to a bunch of true crime podcasts and then writing this sort of extreme, sort of almost serial killer type personality, and then moving into a more kind of removed analysis of that kind of extreme behavior. But yeah, that'll be. I always feel very sorry for people who have to translate Penance because I can imagine that being a lot more challenging than translating Boy Parts. I think it's Penance has been out in French, and I understand that was quite challenging to deal with a lot of the sort of slang and internet language and stuff. So it'll be really interesting to hear, I guess, how that process goes.
Da, srećom Mirta Jurelj je izvrsna prevoditeljica koja uživa u svom zadatku što je teži. Evo, bližimo se nekako kraju i htjela bih te još pitati nešto da nam kažeš što sada radiš, koji su ti planovi za budućnost, pišeš li već nešto nakon romana Penance? Objavljena je i zbirka kratkih priča She's Always Hungry, koja je sad s kojom sad dosta putuješ i predstavljaš je, mislim da sam negdje pročitala da Boy Parts, Komad malog, da dobiva i kazališnu adaptaciju i filmsku ili oboje. Ispravi me, molim te. Možeš nam nešto reći o tome?
Yeah, Boy Parts was adapted for the stage last year for Soho Theatre in London. It was on stage as a one-woman show from October to sort of mid-October to the end of November. We had a brilliant actress from the Northeast called Amy Kelly, who you might know from a show called Hijack, who was playing Irina, and it was just her on stage, and she did an amazing job. It was adapted by, I didn't adapt the stage play, it was adapted by a woman called Gillian Greer, who did work for Soho Theatre. And she was just fantastic. She really, really understood the novel and kind of did a great job of condensing like all of this down to 90 minutes, and it was really fun. I really enjoyed seeing it. It was also very fun to, you know, sit in a room and hear a bunch of people laugh at a joke and think like, oh, I wrote that. And yes, so part of the reason that I didn't adapt it for stage myself is because I've been working on a television adaptation of it for 4 years now. It was optioned and went into development very shortly after it was published. Television industry is very slow. I really hope it will make it to screen one day, but not right now, but if everybody keeps their fingers crossed, maybe it will. And yeah, I guess other stuff that I'm doing now, as you've mentioned, the short story collection, which is coming out in the UK in November, and will hopefully eventually make it over here. And otherwise, I'm doing more work for film and television, and I'm working on a 3rd novel, but I don't know how long that's going to take me. But yeah, and I'm traveling a lot, and I get to come to places like Croatia, and that's really fantastic.
Eliza će sutra i u Zagrebu imati gostovanje i razgovor. Pa mislim da bismo mogli ovaj razgovor polako privesti kraju. Ja vas zaista pozivam da čitate i otkrijete Elizu Clark, autoricu koju je s pravom magazin Granta proglasio jednom od 20 mladih novih glasova britanske književnosti. Znači, to je lista koja se svakih 10 godina objavljuje i sjetimo se da je Zadie Smith bila jedne godine na toj prestižnoj listi mladih autora i autorica koje svakako treba pratiti i u budućnosti, koji nam donose nešto novo u književnosti, i ja vam jamčim da je glas Elize Clark zaista nešto novo. Hvala, Eliza. Hvala vama na pozornosti. Eliza će knjigu potpisivati dolje, ja mislim, u knjižari, pa sve pozivam da knjigu kupite po prigodnim sajamskim cijenama i da se još podružimo neformalno s Elizom prilikom potpisivanja knjige. Hvala lijepa.
Thank you.